It is April 18th, 2016. We are here at Penn State Lehigh Valley in Center Valley, Pennsylvania. I am Brandon Ward. I am interviewing Sherry Kondrosky. So Sherry, where and when were you born?
I was born in Toledo, Ohio, March 27th, 1948.
All right. And who are and or were your parents, and what were their occupations growing up as well?
Okay, my parents were Bob and June Kaiser. My father was a lithographer, which is the printing business.
Okay.
And my mom didn't work that I know of. She was able to stay home and take care of children, us children. So.
How many siblings did you have?
I have a brother and a sister.
Okay. And what are their names?
My brother Gary, and he's 66, and my sister Lori is going to turn 62.
Okay. Did any of them serve in the military as well?
My sister did. She was in the Air Force also.
And did she serve during Vietnam, or did she serve during other periods?
She's 6 years younger than me, so yes, it was still Vietnam. She was in. She got stationed over in Taiwan, and she was more into security, and so she was part of a force that was looking at messages that were coming over the radios and things like that to make sure nobody was going to attack and when things were going to happen. So.
How many years did she serve? You know.
She served 4. Yeah.
And what were you doing before you joined the service?
I went in right after high school, as soon as I graduated. So I was in school.
And in what branch of the military did you serve?
The United States Air Force.
Did you enlist, or were you drafted into the Air Force? When you
I enlisted.
You enlisted?
Yeah.
Okay. Why did you choose that specific branch over the Marines, the Army, the Navy?
That's a good question to ask, because I never was told why by my parents, but I have a feeling that they couldn't afford college or anything, so they decided the service was the best place for me to go after high school, and they told me to go in and take the test for the Air Force and work my way down.
Work your way down?
The Air Force was the top.
Okay.
They were the best. And if I passed their test, then that would be great. If I didn't pass their test, then I would go just work my way down, the Navy, and that way. But I did pass the test.
So what happened when you departed for boot camp and your early days of training prior to that?
We were living in Utah, in a small town on the eastern side of the state, so I had to go into Salt Lake. I flew out of there. Had never been away from home at all in my life by myself. So first time on an airplane, flew to San Antonio, and with a whole group of people who had all had the same date to report down there. We all got picked up and taken over to the base. Very, very scary, because everything just came at you so quickly. Everything that you had to do, you just had to completely reverse your lifestyle.
Can you tell us about any of your experiences at boot camp that you remember vividly?
I can.
Good or bad?
Good or bad. There were 4 of us in a room. There were bunk beds, and I had a girl on the top bunk, my bunk, and she didn't adjust very good at all, and she really had some problems, and she would fall out of bed in the middle of the night, and it was scary for everybody else, because we didn't know what was going on, and she did end up having to leave for medical reasons. She couldn't adjust. It was very difficult. I was in San Antonio in the middle of the summer, because I had gone in July. So boot camp was 6 weeks, very physical, plus you had classes that you had to take, first aid and other things like that. Lost a lot of weight. I couldn't leave boot camp until they made fixes to my uniform, because it was too big and they couldn't have me leaving with the uniform not fitting, so I had to wait. So.
Do you recall any of your instructors while you were there? Did they make an impact on your career itself?
Not so much on my career, but I do remember them. I had, I think it was 2 women and a man, and they were very by the book, and everything had to be just so. But like I said, it was very hot in Texas, and it would be interesting because the women instructors would take their skirts off when they were in the barracks so that they wouldn't get wrinkled. And they would have their slips on, but they would sit there without their skirts on, which I thought was very interesting, so to speak.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Did you receive any specialized training when you were in San Antonio?
No, I didn't, no.
So how did you adapt to the military life? Obviously, you said it was a big adjustment for you, the physical regimen, living in the barracks, the food, and all of that.
Yeah, you just did adjust, you know. After the newness wore off, the first couple of weeks, then, you know, then you just sort of got used to it. Everybody had to pull a 3-hour shift of watching over the barracks, and sometimes that fell from 12 midnight to 3 in the morning, other times during the better part of the day. I actually had to stay back in boot camp for 2 extra weeks because I did have some problems, but I still made it through and got out. It just took me a little bit extra longer, so.
Do you still have any friends from boot camp that you stay in connection with?
No, I don't. Unfortunately.
It's tough.
Yeah, it is.
So can you tell me, where did you serve and how many years did you spend in the Air Force?
I actually spent 2.5 years in. After being done at boot camp, I got sent to, it was funny, they would ask you, did you have a preference of where you would want to go? And because my family had lived on the West Coast for 10 years or so, I thought, let me go back east and see something new. So instead, they sent me to McChord Air Force Base in Seattle, Washington, where I had already lived in the area before, but that was okay. It was good.
So what were some of your duties? Is it called an MOS, I believe, in the Air Force?
Yes, I was administrative.
Okay.
And so at McChord, I was stationed with a manpower group who went out and did surveys of how long it took people to do their jobs in these areas, always looking to improve the work and how quickly it got done, but how well it got done. So I worked in an office with a civilian woman who became a good friend of mine, and I would type up their reports. It was a lot of numbers, but I would type up their reports when they brought them back.
So did you ever have any communication with any forces overseas through this administrative work?
No, I didn't, no.
So what kind of friendships and camaraderie did you form while serving in these different locations that you were in?
Very good ones. When I was at McChord, I had a lot of friends. It was a big barracks, and we were lucky. We all had our own rooms, which was nice. We had stereos. We played our music and had a lot of good friends. We would, when we weren't at work, the weekends were ours, so we would go off and do things. We would go to state fairs, and we would go to clubs. And that's also where I met my husband.
Really? Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Sure. I got to McChord in the beginning of September, and I got to the base, got my room, and got all unpacked and everything. And somebody said, go over to the Airmen's Club. You can, get something to eat, and they have dances and things over there. And so I did. I walked in and met him the first night I was on base. And so we formed a friendship, which turned into love and marriage.
How did you stay in touch with family and friends back home while you were stationed in different states?
Back then, that was, of course, pre-cell phone, so I wrote letters. That's how we stayed in touch. There were phones in the barracks. There were pay phones. I shouldn't say there weren't any, so I could call once in a while on payphone too. So
you were able to keep in touch with them?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what did you do for recreational fun, when you weren't on duty?
That's when we just did the local things in the towns in the town that was near us. We could go to the malls and do things and shop. And like I said, we went to clubs on the weekend. There were bands that would come in, and McChord is right next to Lewis Army Base, and so there were clubs over there too. So we would go back and forth.
Do you have any vivid memories from that you can tell us a story from one?
It was just a lot of fun, yeah.
So where were you when the war ended in Vietnam? Because obviously you were, serving around that time.
Well, no, I was out way before the war ended.
Okay.
Yeah, because I went in I graduated in 1966. I went in 1966.
Okay.
And at that time, there was a rule that you didn't have to serve all 4 years if you got married and wanted to get out. And so at the time, my husband, who was then my fiance, because we got engaged while he was over in Thailand. He was at Udorn Air Force Base, and so we got married right after he got back, and I was able to get out because he had served his 4 years and he was getting out.
And what was your husband's primary job when he was in?
He was in supply, and so he outfitted all the pilots for when they went up on their missions, things like that.
So obviously back when you served in the 1960s, women were not allowed to serve in combat, but being in the year 2016, more and more women are wanting to and able to serve on the front lines as long as they have the physical capabilities. What are your thoughts of having women serve along with their male counterparts on the front lines?
I feel that if they are very capable, that they are just as good as the men are, and that they can think the same way and are very capable of leading people just as well as the men are. So I feel that if they can, they should be able to do it.
So going back, you met your husband when you were in the military. Can you tell me more about that? Apparently how he proposed?
Yes. At that, when we were at McChord, we fell in love, and he got orders to go to Udorn over in Thailand, and so I was stateside. And while he was gone, I got sent to Ent Air Force Base in Colorado Springs. And by that time, we wrote letters. In fact, we still have all of the letters that we wrote to each other. So we wrote every week constantly. That's how you could keep in touch. And so he went to the radio station on his base and got permission to call me, which had to go through the radio stations, and the signal had to be bounced all the way from there to where I was in Colorado Springs. And so I got a phone call in the barracks one day, and I'm standing in the hallway on the payphone, and every time you said something, you had to say over for it to transmit. And so he asked me to marry him, and I said yes, over, and he said, I love you, over. So it was kind of unique in that respect.
I'm sure that was definitely a day that you'll never forget.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So how did you return home? Your last duty station was in Colorado Springs, and then obviously you went home. How did you return home? Just by plane?
Well, actually, I didn't go home because I was at Ent Air Force Base when my husband came back from Thailand, and so he came back to where I was, and we got married and started our life together. So I didn't go home afterwards. We went back to Seattle area at McChord because we really liked it up there, and so we went back up there. We drove from Colorado. We stopped in Utah, which is where my family lived, and my parents met my husband for the first time. We were already married, and we stayed there a few days and then continued our drive on up to Seattle, where we lived for a year.
And then where did you live after Seattle?
My husband's parents lived in New Hope. They had a business, and so after a year we decided to come back east and see how our life would go, and so we flew back here and then ended up staying. We always thought we would go back at one point to the west, but we never ended up doing it.
So you've been here in Pennsylvania for the majority of your lives together?
Since 1970, I think it was, yeah.
So how were you received by your family and the community after you got out? Just their thoughts on you serving?
They were fine. They were very nice. They were very happy that I did it. So it was a good thing for me. Not so much for my husband, but good for me.
Why not as much for your husband?
Because when he came back, people weren't liking that we were over there and fighting and having all of our men killed. And people would spit on them when they came through the airports and say nasty things about them. It was not very good, not good at all. Fortunately, things have changed around, and it's gotten a lot better.
So obviously, the military and civilian life are two completely different things. For those who have served, how did you readjust from military life to civilian life, and was it difficult at all for you?
No, it really wasn't difficult. It actually gave me a lot of structure in my life. I'm a person who makes the bed every morning, do certain things on certain days because that's the way you did it in the service. And in that respect, it gave me structure. And when I started working in a school district, I felt that was a really good thing to have that structure.
You served in a school district, you said?
I worked in a school district as a secretary, yeah.
What school district?
New Hope Solebury School District.
Have you remained in contact with or reunited with any of your fellow veterans that you served with?
No. Unfortunately, we all went our separate ways and just never stayed connected.
Are you a member of any of the veterans organizations around the area?
Yes, we belong to the American Legion, and this shirt is our Vietnam Veterans chapter in Quakertown that I belong to.
And what exactly does this chapter do for veterans?
We do fundraisers, and we give out scholarships, and just make sure that our veterans are well taken care of and respected nowadays. We go out of our way for the veterans that are coming home now to make sure that they're taken care of.
So you said you worked as a secretary for a school district. From what year to what year did you do that?
I started at New Hope in 1988, and I retired in 2013.
So you did that for the majority of your life,
Right.
obviously.
Right.
What about the years that preceded 1988? Did you do anything else?
Yes, I always worked, always had to work, and I worked in various jobs. When my children were young, I worked at night, and so that my husband would be home. We didn't like, farming them out to sitters all the time, so we always tried to make sure one of us was home.
So how did your experiences at these different bases, how did they mold you, or how did they affect your life in any way?
Well, I was brought up with a family that did a lot. We went places and saw things, and so I was never afraid to go somewhere I hadn't been. It was always a challenge for me and very exciting, I thought. So it gave me that freedom, I think, to do things with my life.
So right now they have the post 9/11 GI Bill for veterans that get out to be able to use for college and other things. And back then they had the Montgomery GI Bill, which isn't used as much today. Were you able to take advantage of any of those opportunities using the GI Bill, or were you able to transfer it to any of your children for use?
No, I didn't. No, the way I went with my job, with what I was skilled at in the administration, secretarial, I didn't need to do that, so I didn't.
Were you able to get any benefits from the Veterans Affairs offices or anything from the military in general for the time that you served?
We have signed up with the veterans. I haven't had to use the medical or anything because I have other benefits that are good, but it's out there if you need it. My sister does, so it is out there if you need it. Yeah.
What are some life lessons that you learned from your military service?
Life lessons. Never take anything for granted, that's for sure. Life is too fleeting. You need to grasp it. If you want to do something, go somewhere, do it, because you just never know.
How has your military service impacted your feelings about war and the military branches in general?
My husband and I have a lot of pride in being military. We respect anyone in the military. We don't always respect the people who are sending them places in what they have to do. But, that's true of a lot of people, I think.
What message would you like to leave for future generations who will hear or see this interview?
Just to be proud of your country, be proud of what this nation has built for the last hundreds of years, and just fight for your responsibilities and do what is good for your country.
Looking back on your experiences, would there have been anything about your military lifestyle that you would have changed? Would you have ever considered today spending 20 years in or doing anything different?
I think that's a good thought, that possibly if things hadn't been the way they were when my husband came back, that maybe we would have considered, because it would have given us a better, what am I trying to say? A better foothold on our life, I think, instead of scrambling for jobs and maybe taking something that we really didn't want to do, we would have had our career fields and we would have gone places that, we hadn't seen and shared that aspect of our life. So in that respect, I think I might have considered it.
So you had said earlier that you possibly had the chance of going to Germany. If you were sitting here today, would you have done it?
I think I would have considered it a lot stronger than I did back then. Back then, when he came home, we just wanted to get out, and that was it. We didn't want any parts of the service anymore because of what we had already been through. But I think I would think about it a little differently now.
All right, Sherry, so we've heard about your time that you spent in the Air Force, and obviously you and your husband, that's where you met, and you've been married ever since that. So can you tell me a little bit about his experience from what you've known?
Yes. He was about to be drafted and didn't want to end up in the Army, and so he enlisted into the Air Force. He went and took the test himself and got into the Air Force. And so he went in 1964 after he graduated from high school.
And can you tell me about any of the places that he served? You said Thailand was one of the places?
Yeah, he did his basic down in San Antonio, and then he got sent to McChord Air Force Base before I did. I think he was there. He might have been there at least, I think, a year at least before I got there. And then after we'd been there for a year and knew each other, then he got orders to go to Udorn, which is in northern Thailand on the Laos border. And he went there and served a year from 67 to 68.
Are you able to tell us about any of the experiences that he had when he was stationed in Thailand?
He does tell stories about the women that used to come in and do their laundry for them, and their uniforms would come back stiff because they used the rice for starch, and they could barely move because they would do that. And they lived in big I don't know what you call them. They were like with the tin roofs. The big barracks were like that. They were rounded. And because of the heat and everything over there, it was very, very, very hot in Thailand, hot and muggy. There were snakes you had to watch out for. There would always be, he would tell me there would always be dead snakes on the runway that planes would kill as they were landing, taking off.
So obviously you guys stayed in touch through letters. How often were you guys able to write to each other?
We wrote every week. Our letters always were crossing in the mail. We still, I don't know how many we have, but we still have all the letters that we wrote to each other back and forth at that time. And because you couldn't really call because it had to come over the radio transmission, and there were no cell phones back then. So that was how we communicated.
How difficult was that year that you guys were apart from each other?
It was very hard because I was so young that I still wanted to have a life. I loved him dearly, but I still wanted to have, I had friends and still did things in a normal way, which he couldn't do over there. He was, surrounded by a war, and it was difficult in that sense, trying to keep our perspectives, going the same way.
How was he received by the family and community versus how you were received when he came home? It was obviously a lot different.
His family and community were very receptive. He had graduated from a high school in New Hope, Pennsylvania, and one of the teachers at that school had a journalism class, and they actually made reel-to-reel tapes and sent them over to all of the men from the high school who were serving over in Vietnam in that area. So he would get tapes from them, telling them what was going on in the world and, life back at home, which was really, really appreciated.
What has your husband done since he separated from the military all those years ago?
He's a quality control engineer, and he spent most of his life doing that. He did retire just a few years ago. So,
what organization did he work for?
Too many to remember. He worked for a lot of different companies. It's very, up and down business. He was working for a company in Newtown when the Challenger exploded. So when that happened, a lot of the people in that company lost their jobs because they lost their connection because of what happened. So quality control is always an up and down thing.
So he shifted from being supply in the Air Force, and he took that and ran with it out in the civilian sector.
Absolutely.
Excellent. So the military definitely helped him
in
in that regard.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
All right. That's about all we have. Thank you very much, Sherry, for sharing all of your experiences while you spent in the military. I appreciate you coming in today.
Thank you, Brandon. It was an honor to be here, and I appreciate your talking to me.
Thank you very much.